I stood in the perfect custom-built kitchen, stirring the sauce when she snapped the wooden spoon across my hand. The stinging red mark was an old story, ignored by my father and sister. But as she delivered the final blow, New Year's Eve is just at Brielle's. You make your own plans. Grace. My phone buzzed. 8 figures. My company sale just finalized. I looked at the spoon, then at the massive transfer email. Perfect, I said, the word finally sounding like a cold-blooded plan. Not surrender. The yellow light hanging low over the granite counter of my father's kitchen in Maple Ridge, Ohio, did not cast a warm glow. It just made everything look greasy and tired. It was the kind of lighting that emphasized dust motes and the slight slump in the shoulders of 32-year-old Grace Stone. Me. As I stood stirring a thick, heavy cream sauce, it was a classic bechamel. Simple enough, but in this kitchen, under her eye, it felt like I was diffusing a bomb. The scent of melted butter and nutmeg was supposed to be comforting, a scent of home, of holidays. But here, it was the smell of obligation, the lingering aroma of the fact that I was only invited back to the ancestral home of the Stone family for Christmas week because I was, fundamentally, useful. I was the reliable one, the one who cooked and cleaned and never started drama, the one who made the holidays run smoothly so my younger half-sister, Brielle, could take all the credit for the ambiance. I was wearing a borrowed, slightly too tight apron that had belonged to my late mother, which Darlene, my stepmother for 2 decades, had insisted I wear because it wouldn't do for your fancy city clothes to get sauce on them. Darlene herself, who had not been invited to this particular station, stood beside me, adjusting a pristine white tea towel draped over her shoulder with an obsessive, minute precision that only women who spend their entire lives controlling small domestic spaces truly master. She smelled of expensive, aggressive perfume and fear. The latter was invisible to everyone but me. I was stirring the sauce, maintaining what I thought was a perfectly acceptable medium speed, following the directions I'd learned from a French chef years ago. Not Darlene's specific, highly irritating figure-8 motion. I didn't see the blow coming. I never did. It was always a sudden, sharp, startling intrusion into my reality. One moment, Darlene was smoothing the towel. The next, the heavy, smooth wooden spoon, which was meant for mixing but always felt like a tool of correction in her hand, arced and struck the back of my right hand, right across the knuckles. Crack. It was the sound of wood on bone, a dull, dead sound that instantly felt hot and electric. It didn't truly hurt until the second the air filled the space where the spoon had been. What kind of stirring is that? Her voice was low, a dangerous, controlled hiss, not a shout, because shouting drew attention. You'll ruin the whole dinner. Grace, are you even paying attention? Or are you just dreaming off in your own little world again? I didn't flinch, not outwardly. Flinching meant giving her the satisfaction of the reaction. Flinching meant she was still winning the subtle, decades-long battle for control of my nervous system. I just held the wire whisk steady, letting the white, thick sauce swirl, forcing my hand to remain absolutely still against the instinctive desire to snatch it away and cradle it. My eyes dropped to the back of my hand. A bright, angry crimson mark was already rising, a single, sharp welt that would fade to a bruise by morning. It was a badge of dishonor I was now too old for, a relic of a past I should have outrun years ago. I scanned the room, a practiced movement. This was the part where someone, anyone, was supposed to intervene. Brielle, my half-sister, 3 years my junior, and currently the family princess, was sitting at the breakfast nook, her expensive phone practically glued to her ear, giggling into it. She wore a thick knitted sweater that made her look cozy, safe, and completely oblivious. She didn't look up, not even a twitch. Brielle had mastered the art of being conveniently deaf to any conflict that didn't directly involve praising her. My father, Frank, was in his armchair in the living room, ostensibly reading some financial news on his enormous tablet. He wore his standard expression of avoiding controversy at all costs. He managed a single, split-second glance in our direction, a flicker of the eye that caught the movement, the sharp, authoritative thrust of the spoon. He looked back down. Just like always, the silence of his non-reaction was louder than Darlene's blow. Frank's non-intervention was how Darlene maintained her dominion. She knew, and I knew, that the rules she enforced were tacitly approved by the man who was supposed to be my protector. I felt the familiar, cold wave of isolation wash over me, but this time, it was different. It didn't carry the flavor of despair. It tasted like high-octane gasoline. And then, my phone, resting innocently on the stainless steel prep counter beside the spice rack, vibrated. It was a muted, corporate buzz, the kind of noise that announces the arrival of something significant, something inescapable. I glanced down. The motion subtle, a slight turn of the neck. The sender was a name I knew well. Piercrest Legal, the law firm that had brokered the sale. The subject line was chillingly mundane. Final escrow transfer confirmation. My heart hammered, not from fear of Darlene, but from the raw, intoxicating power contained within that notification. The deal had closed. Harvest Line Systems, the company I had founded in a dingy, borrowed kitchen years ago, a company Darlene believed was just a small-time consulting gig, was officially gone, and the final, massive wire transfer had just hit my account. The transaction, after all the fees and taxes, still represented a sum in the territory of 8 figures, a number that dwarfed anything Frank or Darlene had ever earned or even dreamed of possessing. None of them, not Frank, not Brielle, and especially not Darlene, knew I was the sole founder and primary shareholder. They just assumed I had a good, stable, mid-level management job on the West Coast. I allowed myself the smallest, most secret smirk. My lips barely moved. A flicker of muscle control I'd learned the hard way. The red welt on my hand throbbed, a physical reminder of why I had to leave this place and build what I had built. I lifted my head and my finger darted out, locking the screen just as Darlene turned back, her eyes sharp, looking for any sign of defiance or distraction. She didn't miss a beat. She saw the whisk in my hand, still steady, and the sudden tension in my posture. Darlene snatched the wooden spoon back, wrenching it from my grip with an unnecessary, forceful tug. She didn't speak. She didn't need to. This was the performance. She took the spoon and began stirring the sauce herself, adopting her signature, exaggeratedly slow and precise figure-8 motion. She did this directly in front of me, in front of the window that looked into the living room where my father sat, and in the general direction of Brielle. It was a public, deliberate act of showing everyone, and me, that I was incompetent, that even at this simple task, she was superior, and that my efforts always needed her correction. The clatter of the ceramic bowl she used to collect discarded eggshells as she stirred was loud in the sudden quiet of the house. It was a symphony of petty humiliation. Then, Darlene delivered the real weapon, cloaked in casual disinterest. She spoke over the clatter, not looking at me, her eyes fixed on the perfectly emulsifying sauce. "You know, Grace," she said, her voice dripping with false concern. "I think this year, we'll just keep New Year's Eve at Brielle's new place. It'll be less complicated, fewer moving parts, and you're likely busy, right? You should probably just take care of yourself this year. You take care of yourself. It was the family code for you are not invited, you are not wanted, and you don't fit here." New Year's Eve was the big stone family gathering, the annual ritual where Brielle was celebrated. Frank made a brief, tipsy toast, and Darlene ruled the kitchen, to be explicitly excluded. Even with the flimsy excuse of less complicated, was a formal removal from the inner circle. It was the adult version of being told to go play in your room while the other kids got cake. I swallowed. The rejection was sharp, bitter, and familiar. I felt the heat rising in my throat. Not tears, but adrenaline. This was it, the final, definitive push away. They needed my labor for Christmas dinner, but they didn't need my presence for the transition into the new year. They expected me to feel hurt. They expected me to retreat. They expected me to offer a meek defense, or perhaps to simply nod, defeated. Instead, I looked Darlene straight in the eye, my gaze steady, cold, and utterly devoid of emotion. I gave her the only response she had left room for. I chose one word. Perfect. I let the single word hang in the air between us. The sound was flat, almost metallic. Darlene paused her stirring, her head tilted, momentarily confused by the absence of the expected sting or protest. Brielle, finally, paused her giggling and looked over. Sensing the subtle shift in the atmosphere, even Frank paused his scrolling, the light from his tablet flickering across his face. Perfect. In my mind, the word reverberated, not with the sound of despair or self-pity that I had used as a young girl when they told me I wasn't good enough, but with the crystalline clarity of strategic victory. The moment broke. Darlene shrugged, dismissing my compliance as mere resignation. She went back to perfecting her sauce, and Brielle returned to her phone. Frank returned to his newsfeed. They had won this small final battle of the holiday visit, confirming their narrative. Grace was the outsider, the useful shadow, easily discarded when the real celebration began. They turned their backs. That was their first critical mistake. As soon as they were occupied, I reached for my phone, my movements slow and deliberate, savoring the moment. I typed in my passcode and opened the banking application. The balance was displayed in crisp, black digits, an almost unimaginable sum now sitting available, settled, and mine. The sheer magnitude of the number was a heavy, beautiful weight. I stared at the new balance, the equivalent of what they would all earn in 3 lifetimes, and then I lifted my eyes. I looked directly at the wooden spoon Darlene still held, tapping it rhythmically on the edge of the pot. A low, authoritative tock, tock, tock. That spoon, the symbol of 4 decades of control, of being told I was doing it wrong, of being diminished, measured, and found wanting. The instrument of correction for every misplaced ambition I'd ever harbored. The idea, which had been a low simmer for months, now came to a roaring, rolling boil. It wasn't enough to be rich. It wasn't enough to be successful. That money was just currency. The real payment had to be exacted in the currency of respect, recognition, and boundaries. If they were unwilling to carve out a seat for me at their table, a place at their meager, emotionally stingy holiday gathering, then I wouldn't just build a new table. I would build an entire magnificent hall, and I would invite every person they had ever exiled, every person they had ever dismissed as too complicated. The spoon kept tapping. Talk, talk, talk. It was her drumbeat of authority. I pulled out the spare key fob from the zipped compartment of my purse, the fob that contained the digital memory of my new house, my secret house. I took a deep, steady breath, the first truly honest breath I'd taken all week. I wasn't just planning dinner, I was planning a coup. The scene dissolved, melting away the stale yellow light and the cheap granite countertop of Maple Ridge. The next image was sharp, clean, and blindingly white. I was standing, hours later, in the center of a vast kitchen island made of honed white quartz. The air smelled of fresh drywall and possibility, not of old grease. The surfaces were clean, minimalist, and reflective. Instead of one small window looking out onto a suburban backyard, the walls of this room were floor-to-ceiling glass, wrapping around the entire structure. This was the kitchen of the Halcyon Ridge Overlook Estate, my house, nestled high on the hill overlooking Port Halcyon, Washington. It was the house I had bought in cash, sight unseen save for the architectural renderings, the house that no one in Maple Ridge knew existed. The appliances were sleek, black, and silent. A double oven, a professional-grade induction cooktop that shimmered like dark water, and beneath my hand, the cool, silent expanse of the stone island. It was an amphitheater built for a chef, and I, the one who was always stirring wrong, was the conductor. I ran my unbruised left hand across the perfect, cold surface of the stone. Outside, the lights of the distant city twinkled like scattered diamonds, a view worth the 7-figure price tag I had paid for the property alone. I was alone, but the isolation here felt magnificent, deliberate, and earned. I walked over to a drawer and pulled out a simple, Stainless steel utensil. Not a wooden spoon. Never a wooden spoon. This was a sophisticated, flexible spatula, designed to fold, not beat. I looked at the fading red welt on my right hand, the physical testament to my family's last, dying effort to miniaturize me. When Darlene first hit me with that spoon, I was 9 years old. I was little and fragile, trying desperately to earn a place at the counter. And when I failed to stir the gravy correctly, she punished me. Back then, I believed I deserved it. I believed I was, fundamentally, broken, and she was simply the necessary repairman. I thought, maybe if I just try harder, if I just stir it exactly the way she says, she will approve, and Dad will finally look at me and smile. I spent 40 years, 2/3 of my life, believing I was wrong and that the spoon was right. But the woman who stood in this glass kitchen, overlooking the wealth of a company she had built from scratch, was no longer that frightened child. This time, the injury was just a reminder, an irrelevant, tiny sting from a world that I was about to obliterate. The first time she hit me for stirring wrong, I believed I deserved it. I whispered into the quiet, echoing volume of my new domain. The sound of my own voice felt small in the vast space, yet infinitely powerful. But not this time. This time, her spoon is going to knock right against the very walls she spent 40 years building, the walls that kept me out, and the walls that kept her in. The quiet anticipation of the upcoming confrontation, the perfect, terrifying clarity of my revenge plan, settled over me. The game was no longer about stirring sauce, it was about defining the boundaries of family, and I held all the maps and all the keys, and the first move was scheduled for New Year's Eve. Now, I was looking at a bruise on my hand caused by a sharp, symbolic strike. Back then, in the long, drawn-out quiet of my childhood in Maple Ridge, Ohio, the damage was less visible, more pervasive. It wasn't about the physical hits, it was about the deliberate erosion of space, of self. Until I learned to occupy the minimum possible volume in any room, I was the shadow that ensured the light shone brighter on someone else. The holidays were the cruelest time. The annual audit of who mattered and who didn't. Every Christmas, every birthday, every celebration revolved around Brielle. She was the star, the main event, the delicate, charming centerpiece around whom the entire family solar system spun. Brielle, with her flowing blonde hair and ready, practiced laugh, was Darlene's masterpiece and Frank's escape from the difficult truth of having an introverted, observant older daughter from his first marriage. I remember standing under the enormous, perfectly decorated Christmas tree in our living room, the space choked with the scent of pine and privilege. Brielle's presence formed a shimmering, colorful mountain, tied with satin bows, overflowing the designated Brielle zone. These were the gifts she genuinely desired: designer clothing, the latest electronics, elaborate dolls that were too expensive to be played with roughly. They were tokens of unconditional adoration, proof of her central status. Mine were different. My gifts were always practical. I would unwrap a few neatly folded pairs of socks, a plain leather-bound journal, perhaps a gift certificate to a bookstore. They weren't bad gifts, but they were devoid of joy, stripped of the sense of being seen. They were the tokens you gave to an employee or a distant relative you didn't know well. They said, "We acknowledge your existence, but we don't know who you are." One year, my 10th birthday, I was explicitly forgotten. Brielle had a stomach bug, and the minor inconvenience to her meant my small, planned birthday dinner was canceled with a brusque wave of Darlene's hand. The next morning, Darlene pressed a few crumpled $10 bills into my hand. "Go buy yourself something, Grace," she said, not meeting my eyes. "It's less confusing this way." That was my birthday. A few hastily stuffed bills, a pathetic apology for my own existence. Darlene never called me by a pet name. To Brielle, she was the incessant fountain of saccharine affection. My little star, Mommy's little doll, our sweetheart. To me, Darlene's dialogue was a tight, reductive loop of restriction. Don't bother anyone. Don't make a mess. Don't ask for things. It wasn't physical abuse. It was the slow, steady psychological strangulation that taught me my needs were secondary, that my natural expression was a disturbance. My very presence was an inconvenience. My father, Frank, was the master of neutrality, an art he had perfected to avoid facing Darlene's disapproval, which was as potent as her love for Brielle. When guests came over, which was often, as Darlene loved to showcase her perfect family, Frank would perform the introductions. He would gesture towards Brielle with a proud, expansive wave of the hand. "This is Brielle, our youngest, who is just so clever and artistic." Then, his hand would drop slightly, his tone flattening, as he added me, almost as an afterthought, a quick footnote. "And this is Grace." I learned early that being Grace meant being "and this is," the appendix to the main text. To survive, I became deliberately, exquisitely useful. I learned that the person who cleans up does not appear in the photographs. The person who fixes the wiring on the Christmas tree is not invited to pose under its lights. While Darlene was busy helping Brielle choose the perfect outfit for a photo shoot, or organizing her burgeoning collection of trophies, I was in the background. I taught myself to repair the leaky faucet, change the broken light bulbs in the hallway, and, eventually, to cook. The kitchen became my refuge and my trap. It was the place where I could be acknowledged without being celebrated. "Grace is so good at chopping," Darlene would concede. Never, "Grace is a talented cook." I was the utility. I realized that the person who does the labor is never the subject of the memory. The scrapbooks were filled with images of a pristine, joyful, and completely manufactured family, a family I worked tirelessly to maintain, but was never allowed to join. The first time the wooden spoon stopped being just a utensil and became a true symbolic weapon was the summer I turned 19. It was the year of Brielle's high school graduation party. Brielle hadn't gotten a scholarship to a far-off, difficult college like I had. She was going to the community college 20 minutes away, but Darlene insisted on throwing a lavish, sprawling party for 75 people, treating it like a royal coronation. I was home from my first year of college on the East Coast, technically a guest, but functionally, a hired hand. I was tasked with making the enormous, multi-tiered graduation cake. Specifically, I was working on a giant bowl of fluffy, white buttercream frosting, a difficult recipe to scale up, requiring constant, even stirring to prevent crystallization. I was focused, proud of the smooth, even texture I was achieving. When Darlene came in, she didn't look at the result. She watched the process. She leaned in, her eyes narrowed, inspecting my wrist movement. "No, no, no," she snapped. "You're doing the circle too wide. You'll introduce air bubbles. Stop that." I tried to adjust, but I wasn't fast enough. She grabbed the large, thick wooden spoon, the very same one from the week before, the current model for family discipline, and began to strike my forearms, not hard enough to break the skin, not hard enough to leave a lasting mark, but enough to make the sound. Thwack, thwack, thwack. The blows were repetitive, rapid fire, delivered with an aggressive rhythm. It was the sound of a judge's gavel, an undeniable pronouncement in the quiet domestic space. "You are always ruining things. You never get it right. You are always stirring everything wrong. Grace, everything." I dropped the whisk. I could feel the heat radiating from my face, a deep, burning flush of shame that had nothing to do with physical pain. The few early guests milling in the dining room, a cousin, a neighbor, stuttered their conversations. A nervous, embarrassed laugh floated from somewhere. No one rushed over, no one asked, "Are you okay, Grace?" They just looked away, focusing intently on their appetizers, pretending they hadn't heard the repeated thwacks of the spoon against my young, bare arm. The embarrassment was not Darlene's, it was mine, for having been publicly corrected, publicly exposed as the one who was perpetually wrong. I stood there, 19 years old, frozen, surrounded by the perfect, sterile atmosphere of the party I had helped create. I felt like I hadn't just stirred the cream wrong, I had stirred the very cream of my life wrong. I was faulty. I was a defect. I looked across the dining room. Brielle, radiant and oblivious, was receiving an early gift, laughing brightly and effortlessly. She was the picture of unearned, easy grace. In that moment of burning, complete humiliation, a whisper formed deep in the quietest, most guarded part of my mind, a vow delivered not to anyone else, but to the future version of me. One day, I will have a kitchen where no one uses a spoon to shame anyone else. That sound, the thwack of the wood against my flesh, the percussive judgment, became a trigger. Every time I heard the distinct sound of a wooden spoon hitting the rim of a pot or tapping against a cutting board, my shoulders would tense, my body would anticipate the sting. Even as an adult, years later, the sound would shrink me, make me feel small, like I needed to be corrected, edited, and minimized. The spoon wasn't just wood, it was the embodied sound of restriction, of being told to fit into a space too small for my ambition. They thought the few taps, the few low-voiced criticisms, were harmless, minor adjustments in the process of raising a child. They thought they were simply teaching me to be diligent. What they didn't see was that with every tap of that spoon, they weren't just bruising my skin. They were slamming shut another escape hatch in my soul. Confirming that my only value was in my silent utility, they were locking the doors to the house. Until the day I stopped knocking and decided to go find my own construction crew and build a brand new house, complete with walls of glass and an unlocked front door. The spoon was the catalyst, and now, 13 years later, it would be the hammer that brought their fragile structure down. The wooden spoon had been a catalyst, but the true escape was an envelope sealed with the university crest. When the acceptance letter from Northlake Institute of Technology arrived, it didn't just confirm my admission, it confirmed my extradition. The school was located in Harborview, Washington, a city perpetually shrouded in soft, gray rain. Located an entire continent, an entire America, away from the dry, predictable lanes of Maple Ridge, Ohio. It was a full scholarship, a necessity, as I knew Frank wouldn't pay a dime that wasn't legally required, and Darlene would fight him even on that. I was proud, intensely and quietly proud, that my intelligence was my ticket out, a weapon they couldn't tap with a wooden spoon. I remember holding the heavy parchment, the official seal cool beneath my fingers, and walking into the living room where the three of them were watching some vapid reality show. Darlene glanced at the envelope, her expression souring instantly. She didn't offer praise, or even a congratulation. She simply sighed, a dramatic exhalation that implied great personal hardship. "Well, there goes my good help," she muttered, adjusting her throw pillow. "Who's going to manage the kitchen when I have the bridge club over? It's going to be so inconvenient. Grace training someone new." I was not her daughter leaving for a world-class institution. I was her sous chef, a kitchen accessory that had unexpectedly broken. The reaction from Brielle was immediate and cloyingly sweet. She walked over to Darlene and draped herself dramatically over the back of the sofa, letting Darlene stroke her hair. "At least I'm staying close, Mommy?" Brielle cooed, looking directly at me with a triumphant gleam. "Our family won't be separated. We won't be complicated." It was a perfectly crafted jab, confirming the family narrative. Brielle was the loving anchor, and I was the complicated centrifugal force, pulling away. Frank's response, however, was the one that truly cemented my departure, driving the blade of isolation in deeper than Darlene's casual cruelty. He finally put down his reading glasses, looked at me, and nodded, almost approvingly. "You'll be fine, Grace," he said, his voice flat, intending the statement as high praise. "You're the independent one. You've always been able to take care of yourself. You don't need us the way Brielle needs us." He thought he was giving me a compliment, recognizing my strength, my resilience. To me, it was a court sentence delivered by the judge who should have been my father. "You are strong enough to be abandoned. Your independence is your life sentence of solitude." I realized then that my ability to survive was, in their eyes, a justification for their neglect. the farewell was suitably underwhelming. Brielle, 2 years prior, had gone off to community college, the local option, which they treated like she was going to Harvard. She got a full-scale BBQ party, complete with rented folding tables, a banner that read, "Proud parents of our little scholar," and a 3-layer cake. My send-off was a normal Tuesday dinner, no cake, no pictures. Frank was late from work. Darlene complained about the cost of the luggage tags I had bought, and Brielle was distracted by a phone call with her new boyfriend. I packed my worn suitcases into the small, rusting sedan I had paid for myself and drove away before the sun rose, feeling less like a graduate leaving for college and more like a fugitive escaping captivity. Harborview was the antithesis of Maple Ridge. It was a city of perpetual moisture and relentless vertical ambition, a contrast to the flat, dry predictability of Ohio. Northlake Institute was rigorous, unforgiving, and exactly what I needed. I lived in a cramped, cinder-block dorm room for the first 2 years, then moved into a cheap, dimly lit off-campus apartment that smelled faintly of mildew and ancient takeout. The scholarship covered tuition, but everything else was on me. To pay the bills, I worked. I held down 2 jobs that ran together in a blur of clattering dishes and whispering silence. I spent my mornings stocking shelves at a massive, impersonal food distributor, learning the mechanics of logistics. I spent my evenings shelving books and wiping down tables at the university library, surrounded by the cool, humming silence of people who were also striving, but alone. My nights were spent hunched over cheap instant coffee, the cup scalding my hands, a comforting kind of pain, predictable and self-inflicted, studying under the harsh, cold white glow of fluorescent lights. The hum of the bulb was my only companion. I traded the yellow, greasy warmth of my father's kitchen for the stark, surgical light of a life I was building, one calculation at a time. The holidays were the true test of my self-exile. New Year's Eve, freshman year, I was 2,000 miles away. I sent a simple text message to the family group chat. "Happy New Year. Hope you all have fun." The response, when it finally arrived, was a single emoji, a celebratory firecracker, sent by Darlene at 2:47 a.m. Eastern Time. There was no follow-up, no picture of the family gathered, no text from Frank or Brielle, just a solitary emoji, hours after the fact, a digital equivalent of the crumpled $10 bills she'd once given me for my birthday. I spent the exact moment the calendar flipped over staring at the blank ceiling of my dorm room, listening to the muffled, indifferent noise of other students celebrating what felt like a different world. New Year's Eve, sophomore year. I had a small, private room above a dry cleaner's, which vibrated rhythmically whenever the industrial machines ran. I didn't send a text this time. I knew the silence would be the same. Instead, I put on some low, melancholic jazz music and sat at the tiny, sticky table I used as a desk. As the clock ticked down toward midnight, I did something strange. I stood up and walked to the small, cracked electric stovetop that came with the unit, the only thing that could be loosely termed a kitchen. I placed my hands flat on the cold, greasy surface of the stovetop. It was a symbolic gesture, a physical grounding in my new, self-made reality. I whispered to the cold metal, "One day, I will count down to the new year in my own kitchen." It wasn't a desperate wish. It was a covenant with myself, a promise that the next time I was alone for the holidays, it would be a choice, not an exile. The classes I took were unconventional, a blend of data analytics, supply chain management, and food science. I developed a strange, passionate fascination with logistics, the precise, intricate choreography required to get fresh produce from a small farm field to a large city plate, on time, with minimal waste. I devoured textbooks on cold chain integrity and predictive modeling. I found beauty in the algorithms that could shave 2 hours off a delivery route or prevent 15% spoilage in a truckload of fragile greens. I began to realize that my mind was uniquely wired to see the bottlenecks in any system. Where others saw a complex, messy network, I saw a flow diagram with obvious points of friction, places where information or product was deliberately or carelessly restricted. And then I saw the terrifying parallel. I realized I wasn't just analyzing the food supply chain, I was analyzing my family's emotional supply chain. Darlene and Frank had created a system where all love, attention, and resources were optimized to flow to Brielle, the designated star. I was the structural bottleneck they continuously tried to eliminate, the redundant element, the part that slowed the smooth, controlled operation. My entire childhood had been an exercise in identifying the places I was blocked, restricted, or deemed too complicated to fit into the flow. My quiet nights alone, fueled by cheap noodles and even cheaper coffee, weren't just about surviving college. They were the methodical, painstaking laying of the groundwork for the most sophisticated counterattack of my life. Every line of code I practiced, every model I built, every 4-hour shift I worked in the humid library basement was a brick in a fortress I was building around myself. I was building a system of my own, a logistical fortress that would make me so indispensable, so wealthy, and so geographically removed that their wooden spoon, their only true power, would no longer be able to reach me. They had tried to keep me small by telling me I stirred wrong. I was preparing to show them what happens when the person who stirs the pot starts controlling the entire global shipment. My revenge would not be loud or messy. It would be entirely, beautifully logistical. It would be perfect. Graduation from Northlake was less an ending and more a full-throttle acceleration into my true purpose. I took my degree in applied data and supply chain optimization and immediately plunged into the deep end. Taking a job with Fresh Track Courier, a small to mid-sized food delivery company operating out of the bustling, if slightly grimy, docks of Harborview. I wanted the coalface experience, and Fresh Track delivered. I watched firsthand the daily, grinding inefficiency of moving perishable goods. I saw trucks sit idling for 2 hours because the manifest was still being printed. I saw thousands of pounds of perfect local strawberries discarded because the paper trail got lost between the farm and the warehouse freezer. I saw small, independent grocery owners pay exorbitant prices because they were constantly ordering last minute to replace spoiled inventory. It was a logistical nightmare, a system where the messy, uncontrolled variables of human error and outdated technology were choking the profit and purpose out of the process. My time in the field was horrifyingly illuminating. I kept thinking back to my family's emotional system. The waste was the same. The bottlenecks were identical. In Maple Ridge, the family wasted love and opportunity by misdirecting it all to Brielle. Here, the company wasted beautiful, fresh food through sheer incompetence. I immediately saw the fix. The existing management software was a dinosaur from the 90s, a flat spreadsheet that updated maybe every 2 hours. It was useless for real-time risk assessment. I drafted a proposal for a comprehensive, real-time tracking dashboard. It would use simple GPS from the truck drivers' phones, cross-referenced with weather data and known traffic patterns, to give our dispatchers a live visualization of every single shipment. It would predict, with 95% accuracy, when a bottleneck was about to occur and offer a rerouting solution. I presented it to my manager, a weary man named Chet, who looked like he hadn't slept since the turn of the century. He skimmed the complex technical details I had poured 80 hours of my free time into. He chuckled, a dry, dismissive sound that reminded me instantly of Frank. Real-time tracking, Grace? We're a bunch of diesel trucks hauling asparagus and halibut, not the Apollo space program, he said, pushing the blueprint back across the table. We stick to paper and phone calls. It's too much, too complicated. Just focus on making sure the drivers clock out on time. That conversation was my second, most important push out the door. The familiar feeling of being dismissed, of having my ideas deemed too complicated or unnecessary, ignited the same stubborn, cold fire the wooden spoon had started years ago. I was too big for their box. I didn't quit Fresh Track right away. I needed the paycheck. Instead, I took my idea, gathered 2 equally frustrated colleagues, Amir, a brilliant self-taught coder who hated inefficiency, and Chloe, a marketing whiz who despised corporate waste, and started a side project. We called it Harvest Line Systems. The goal was simple, yet radical. Build a software platform that directly connected small, local farmers and independent stores, bypassing the giant, wasteful middlemen. We would use my algorithms to track the food's journey with absolute precision, ensuring the freshest goods reach the right hands at the right price, reducing spoilage and, crucially, correcting the inherent unfairness in the traditional supply chain. Our office was Amir's dingy, cramped apartment kitchen, located above a noisy auto repair shop. It was the perfect, antithetical workspace. The kitchen counter, chipped formica and permanently sticky, became our main desk, lined with 3 blinking laptops, a tangle of charging cords, and stacks of printouts held down by greasy, empty takeout containers. We drank endless cups of watery, instant coffee and argued about code late into the night, the bass thrum of the tools below providing a constant, gritty soundtrack. And in that chaotic, beautiful space, I cooked. I became the designated chef for the team, making simple, massive pots of chili, lentil soups, or pasta sauces, anything that could be stirred for a long time. The pots were often dented, the stove was unreliable, and the lighting was fluorescent and harsh. But for the first time in my life, I stirred without fear. I would stand there, one hand moving the wooden spoon, a clean, thick, unmenacing utensil I had bought myself, through a pot of marinara, while the other hand was on my laptop, debugging a routing algorithm. The aroma of garlic and oregano mixed with the faint scent of motor oil and burnt caffeine. The kitchen, the very site of my decades-long humiliation, became the locus of my greatest power. I was stirring food, yes, but I was also stirring the future. I was making decisions that mattered, decisions that were valued by the 2 people around me. The sauce was never wrong. The algorithm was either right or wrong, and if it was wrong, we fixed it together, without punitive, shaming blows. After an agonizing winter of sleepless nights and microwave dinners, we got our first big break. A small consortium of struggling independent grocers in the rugged Cascade Mountain region adopted Harvest Line. Their previous supply line was notoriously unreliable, failing completely during periods of heavy snow. Using my predictive routing software, which factored in micro-weather data and dynamic road closures, Harvest Line kept their shelves stocked, preventing the devastating stockouts they usually faced. The grocers saved an estimated $30,000 in lost sales and spoiled produce that winter alone. A respected industry blog, the Food Chain Quarterly, published a short piece about us, calling us the logistical solution for the forgotten farmer. The story went viral within the niche world of agriculture tech. Suddenly, the phones started ringing nonstop. We were deluged with calls. Small organic co-ops in Oregon, family-run apple orchards in upstate New York, independent restaurant chains that wanted to guarantee traceability. The girl who stirred everything wrong was now the person farmers trusted to protect their life's work. The system wasn't just working, it was becoming indispensable. I quit Fresh Track the next month, giving them a curt 1-week notice. I moved all my focus, all my savings, and all my stubborn determination into Harvest Line. We moved out of Amir's kitchen and into a tiny, cheap office space located above the same auto repair shop, smelling faintly of tire dust. My life devolved into pure work. I slept on a worn, lumpy sofa in the corner of the office. I subsisted almost entirely on cheap, bulk-bought pasta, water, and highly concentrated, diluted coffee. My hands were always tired, my eyes perpetually dry, but for the first time, my soul felt utterly, perfectly awake. Every line of Java, every function I wrote, every database migration I executed was a deliberate, calculated strike against the past. They had used the wooden spoon to beat me down for being wrong. Now, my hands were building a global, efficient system that proved I was always, fundamentally, right. I was stirring an entire industry. I began to understand something profound about power and control. If I could successfully build a system that channeled fresh food to the right place and the right people, eliminating waste and injustice in a complex, chaotic network, Then I could absolutely build a new family system. I didn't need their approval. I didn't need their seat at the table. I just needed the power to redraw the lines. I realized that the ultimate revenge wasn't in getting an apology from Darlene. It was in creating a table so magnificent, so inviting, that the right people, the excluded, the overlooked, the true allies, would be drawn to it, and the wrong people would be left outside, staring at the warmth, utterly irrelevant. The plan was crystallizing, moving from abstract vengeance to concrete logistics. Harvest Line Systems was not just a company, it was the mechanism of my freedom and the tool of their forthcoming reckoning. The final stage was approaching, and it all began with the sound of a phone call and a massive sale price. The proposal arrived on a crisp, bright Tuesday morning. Harvest Line Systems, the little logistics engine built on cheap pasta and spite, had grown into an essential, highly valuable piece of agricultural infrastructure. The suitor was Greenspan Markets, a fictional national grocery conglomerate with a reach that stretched across 50 states. The email sat blinking on my screen, a single line summarizing the offer, a cash acquisition valuing Harvest Line at over $90 million. I remember my hands shaking, not from shock, but from the dizzying, surreal sense of finality. I stared at the enormous number, the commas and zeros perfectly aligned, a monumental figure that represented not just money, but absolute freedom. My mind immediately flashed back to the crumpled $10 bills Darlene had once pushed into my hand for my forgotten birthday. I remembered the times Frank would begrudgingly hand me a 20 for gas money, saying, "That's enough for you, Grace. Don't be greedy." They had always enforced a strict economy of need around me, a constant reminder that I was meant to survive on scraps, while Brielle feasted on abundance. And now, this. The sum was so vast, so ridiculously large, that it wasn't even about purchasing things anymore. It was about purchasing the permanent right to never be told I was not enough. The negotiation was kept ruthlessly quiet. My lawyers, based in the sophisticated seaside city of Port Halcyon, Washington, handled every detail. I had been living in a quietly rented, anonymous townhouse in the city for 6 months, having completely severed my ties to the dockyard office. My family knew absolutely nothing. To them, I was still the mid-level logistics consultant, plugging away in dreary meetings. I signed the final documents in a private conference room, the pen heavy in my hand. The moment the ink was dry, the money was, conceptually, mine. My first act of extreme wealth was not what anyone would expect. I didn't race to the nearest dealership for a German luxury sedan or call a high-end designer for a closet overhaul. Instead, I used my reliable, beat-up, 10-year-old sedan, the one that smelled faintly of old coffee and success, and drove. I drove toward the highest point of Port Halcyon, following a winding, steep road that climbed through thick groves of cedar and pine. At the summit of this exclusive neighborhood, known locally as Halcyon Ridge, sat a house, not a sprawling, ornate mansion, but a piece of architectural minimalism, a sanctuary of glass and stone. The house was breathtakingly simple. Its most defining feature was the glass, walls of glass, floor to ceiling, stretching from one end to the other, making the entire structure feel like a brilliant, illuminated box perched on the edge of the continent. I walked straight into the kitchen. This wasn't just a kitchen. It was the physical embodiment of my whispered vow from years ago. The central island was a single, vast slab of white, polished granite, clean and cold, reflecting the overhead track lighting. There were professional-grade double ovens, a seamless induction cooktop, and above the island, a sparkling copper rack holding pristine cookware. This room was a stage, an arena of pure, unadulterated capability, the exact opposite of the low-ceilinged, yellow-lit, and judgment-filled prison of Maple Ridge. For an entire lifetime, I had been relegated to the sidelines, the person who made things run smoothly so the star could shine. In this house, in this kitchen, I was the undisputed, solitary center. I purchased the property through an anonymized corporate entity, Piercrest Holdings, ensuring that any casual property record search in Ohio would hit a dead end. No one in Maple Ridge could ever trace the ownership of the Halcyon Ridge Overlook estate back to Grace Stone. I had achieved the perfect logistical concealment. My first night there was transformative. I didn't unpack. I simply walked into the kitchen and turned on every light. The under-cabinet lighting, the recessed lighting, the soft glow from the ovens. I opened the massive sliding glass door to the balcony, letting the cool, damp night air wash over the pristine stone. I stood there, alone, looking out. The entire city of Port Halcyon was spread below me, a vast, glittering ocean of light, a star map visible from my private perch. There were no low, greasy ceilings here, no harsh fluorescent bulbs throwing shadows on a dirty sink. It was pure, transparent, expansive light. Then, I went to the accessory drawer. I pulled out a small, sleek set of solid wood kitchen utensils, a gift from Chloe when we finally got the first major venture capital investment. They were beautiful, dark walnut, oiled smooth, tools meant for creation, not correction. I found a clear, empty section of the wall and, using two small, elegant metal hooks, I hung the new wooden spoons and whisks. They looked like art. Beneath them, I taped a small, perfectly square piece of thick paper on which I had written, in my neat, clear handwriting, "In this space, spoons are for stirring, not for control." Every morning after that, I would rise early, before the fog lifted. I would make myself a perfect cup of French press coffee, rich and black, and stand by the glass wall, watching Port Halcyon awaken below. I had the money, the house, and the view, but the freedom tasted different than I had expected. It wasn't a rush of consumerist pleasure. It was a profound, bone-deep sense of safety. I was home, and no one could tell me to leave. I spent those first weeks in a strange, suspended state. I didn't know yet what the next stage of my career would be, or even what I would do with this vast, gleaming house, other than simply exist in it, unburdened, but deep down, in the same quiet space where the original vow had formed, I knew exactly what the house was for. It was the ultimate, undeniable card, the weapon I would wield on one specific, perfect night. The final wire transfer from Greenspan hit my account on December 28th, just 3 days after Darlene had struck my hand with the wooden spoon in Maple Ridge and explicitly uninvited me from the family's New Year's Eve gathering. The confluence of events was staggering. The final act of control from my family, followed immediately by the final acquisition of my freedom. The timeline was perfect. The entire chaotic, unpredictable mess of my life suddenly clicked into place, like a master key turning a complicated series of locks. I looked at the fresh bruise, then at the city lights twinkling below my glass walls, and I realized the exclusion was not a rejection. It was the activation code. They had cleared the schedule for me. They had created the perfect empty slot that I would now fill with the most important, meaningful holiday gathering of my adult life. The time for silent construction was over. It was time to invite the guests. The drive back to Port Halcyon the morning after Christmas was a blur of highway and relentless determination. The Ohio snow had turned the roads slick, but I kept the engine humming, the rhythm of the tires on the asphalt providing a counterpoint to the logistical plans already spinning in my head. I had the radio tuned low, a forgotten playlist of early 2000s indie rock, perfect for long-haul introspection. My mind, however, was in overdrive, reviewing every lonely New Year's Eve I had ever endured, every time I had been told to just stay home and keep the house safe. I was already 3 hours into the drive, somewhere deep in the Midwest, when my phone vibrated again. It was a text message from Darlene. I pulled over briefly at a rest stop, the truck engines outside rumbling a restless percussion. The message read, "Just confirming. Dear, New Year's Eve is just at Brielle's place this year. Keep it simple, just the 3 of us. You're surely busy, and it's too dangerous to drive that far back and forth anyway. Be safe, Grace." The message was perfectly engineered. a cloak of motherly concern draped over an explicit banishment. The final sentence, "It's too dangerous to drive that far back and forth," was the sharpest dig. It implied I would be forced to drive 4,000 miles round trip for a few hours of grudging tolerance. It wasn't an invitation. It was a final, stamped refusal of my access, delivered with the smug satisfaction of having saved me from myself. The supposed care felt exactly like a meticulously torn invitation. I looked at the message, then out the window at the vast, desolate landscape. I was driving toward a house that was legally, irrevocably, and grandly mine, a house they knew nothing about. A familiar icy resolve settled over me. I typed my reply. It was the same single word, flat and final, that I had given Darlene in the kitchen. Perfect. Then, I opened my notes application on my phone and titled a new document. New Year's Dinner. Guest list. Everyone who was told there was no room. This wasn't going to be a casual dinner. This was going to be an active reclamation of the holiday, a celebration built entirely from the people, the alliances, and the kindnesses that Darlene and Frank had systematically discarded over the years. My revenge wouldn't be loud or destructive. It would be in the perfect, silent choreography of acceptance. My first call was to my cousin, Ava. Ava was a year older than Brielle and had always been subtly sidelined by Darlene for being too honest and not glamorous enough to be Brielle's sidekick. She was Frank's niece, but Darlene treated her as a lesser auxiliary member of the family. Grace? Wow. Hey, how was the Maple Ridge Circus? Ava's voice was always a little wary when talking about family. The usual. Darlene just texted to confirm I'm uninvited for New Year's Eve. Ava let out a humorless, dry laugh. Oh, welcome to the club. My invite must have gotten lost in the mail again. It's always Brielle's show, isn't it? Honestly, it feels like a liberation to be excluded. It is, I said, my voice gaining strength. But I'm thinking of a counter-program. How would you like to spend New Year's Eve in Port Halcyon, Washington? I've got a new place on the ridge, glass walls, a view of the city. We could make a truly inappropriate amount of food and watch the fireworks from above. There was a moment of stunned silence on the line. Port Halcyon? Grace, that's 2,000 miles away. And a new place? Are you serious? Dead serious. I'm inviting everyone who was told to just make their own plans. Ava's voice cracked with unexpected emotion. I'll be there. I'll drive straight through. Tell me the address. And Grace, thank you. You have no idea. Next was Uncle Dean. Dean, Frank's younger brother, was a gentle, gregarious man who had been exiled to the social wilderness of the family 15 years ago after a minor but unforgivable conflict with Darlene over a piece of inherited antique furniture. He lived a quiet life in Michigan, rarely speaking to anyone in Ohio anymore. I caught him loading firewood. Uncle Dean, it's Grace. I'm calling to invite you to New Year's Eve dinner at my house. He paused, clearly bracing for some kind of Maple Ridge drama. Grace, honey, that's kind of you. But you know how it is. It's just easier if I stay here. Not Maple Ridge, I clarified. Port Halcyon, Washington, my new place. It's a house on a hill. We can watch the city's fireworks from the balcony. It's a gathering of everyone who misses you. There was a long silence, longer than with Ava. Then, Dean let out a booming laugh that sounded so full of genuine joy. It made my eyes prickle. A view of the whole city? You finally did it, didn't you? Kid, you bought your own mountain. I'll be there. I'll bring the best pecan pie you've ever had, even if I have to bake it in the car. The next name on the list, the one that made my hand tremble slightly as I dialed, was Grandma Louise, Frank's mother, the matriarch who had been subtly, effectively sidelined by Darlene for being too kind, too much of a connection to my late mother, and too prone to giving me old-fashioned, practical encouragement. Louise was the one who had quietly slipped me her worn, annotated copy of Larousse Gastronomique when I was 16. You don't stir wrong, Grace, she had whispered to me once, her voice firm despite her frail frame. They just want to see themselves reflected in everything, They're only used to seeing one kind of movement. Don't let them make you small." When she answered, her voice was warm, instantly recognizable. "Grace, darling, I was thinking of you." I swallowed, forcing my tone to remain level. "Grandma, I'm inviting you to my new house in Port Halcyon for New Year's Eve. Just a few of us. Ava's coming. And Dean. It's a no-drama zone. Just good food and a fresh start." Louise didn't jump with excitement or ask about the details of the house. She went quiet, her silence heavy and thoughtful. Finally, she spoke, and her words were the true emotional payoff, the moment that made the entire $90 million acquisition feel worthwhile. "It's been 40 years since anyone in this family intentionally invited everyone, and by everyone, I mean the ones who truly needed a place, without leaving someone out to guard the house or the status quo. I'll be there. Grace, I'll get on the first flight, and I'm bringing something you need, something you don't even know you need yet." Her acceptance was more than just a commitment to a party. It was an affirmation of my new family system. In the days that followed, while the rest of the Stones were presumably arranging their simple and uncomplicated night at Brielle's new, slightly too expensive townhouse, I transformed the glass house into the table of the exiled. I didn't hire a catering crew. I designed the meal myself, a complex logistical operation of flavors and ingredients, a menu that showcased my own personal mastery of food and systems. I arranged the seating. I bought a magnificent, custom-built table that seated 12 comfortably. There was no head of the table, no place of honor for Frank. Had he been invited, there were no separate tables for the kids or the old folks. The seating was democratic, circular, and intentionally arranged to promote connection, not hierarchy. Everyone was placed next to someone they needed to talk to, someone they hadn't seen in years. It was a perfectly optimized, self-correcting social system. The sheer, breathtaking scale of the logistics of my new life contrasted wildly with the petty cruelty of the old. I was flying people in from 3 different time zones, managing rental cars, arranging complex dietary menus, and coordinating a dinner that was more than an event. It was a strategic realignment of my world. On the very last line of my notes app, beneath the finalized guest count and the menu for a celebratory, elaborate seafood paella, I wrote the final, most crucial instruction. Darlene plus Frank plus Brielle, not invited. This was the boundary I had spent a lifetime failing to draw. It was the simple, clean severing of the dysfunctional line. This wasn't about being mean or inflicting suffering. It was about using the power of my newfound stability, my 8-figure wealth and my glass fortress, to define my own space. If they wanted to watch the ball drop, the television in their living room still worked. My life, my view, and my table were officially, irrevocably off-limits. My revenge was not malice. It was the absolute, perfect logistics of absence. I was not uninvited anymore. I was the person who was finally doing the inviting and the excluding. The glass house on Halcyon Ridge was transforming from a sterile monument to success into a beating heart of intention. The air, usually smelling of clean stone and new paint, was now infused with the potential for warmth, though beneath the surface, the atmosphere crackled with the tension of a meticulously planned, high-stakes family negotiation disguised as a holiday party. I knew I couldn't cook an elaborate dinner for 12 people while also managing the social dynamics and the logistics of my guests' arrival. My new system demanded optimization. I hired a young local chef named Marco Reyes. He was barely 25, bursting with creative energy, and specialized in Northwest fusion, focusing on the seasonal bounty of the local area. He was exactly the kind of talent I, as the former founder of Harvest Line, wanted to champion. When Marco first stepped into my cathedral of a kitchen, he stopped dead in his tracks, his eyes wide, his professional reserve momentarily abandoned. He didn't see a house. He saw equipment in space. "This is a chef's heaven." "Grace," he breathed, running a reverent hand over the polished induction cooktop. "Absolute heaven." We collaborated on the menu, a precise, thoughtful blend of comfort and modernity. We settled on a slow-roasted herb chicken, a complex, deeply savory dish that evoked the traditional feel of a holiday gathering. The roasted vegetables, squash, root vegetables, and crisp fennel were sourced directly from the small farms that had been early partners with harvest line systems. The meal included a rich, creamy pumpkin bisque and an array of homemade artisan breads. For dessert, we chose an elevated apple tart, deliberately structured to resemble a recipe I vaguely recalled from Grandma Louise's old cookbook, but upgraded with local artisanal cheeses and spice cider reduction. It was a subtle, coded tribute to the one person who had taught me the right way to use a kitchen. I focused on the environment. I set a single, long table directly parallel to the floor-to-ceiling glass wall. The view of Port Halcyon, now fully illuminated in the early evening, was the undisputed, gorgeous backdrop. The place settings were simple, featuring clean lines and unpretentious white porcelain. Expensive, yes, but tasteful and functional. The design dictated that no matter where you sat, you had an unimpeded view of the city lights shimmering below. No one was relegated to a corner. Everyone shared the spectacle. The kitchen corner was the most symbolic piece of staging. I set up a large, custom wooden sign, hand-painted with the phrase, "Stir your way." Beneath it, I hung a beautiful array of new wooden spoons, metal whisks, and silicone spatulas of various shapes and sizes. It was an arsenal of unshaming tools. "Anyone who wants to help, grab a spoon," I told Marco. "No technique will be corrected." Then, the final, crucial detail: the place cards. Instead of listing the menu or their names, the card tucked into each folded napkin bore a small, handwritten message, one that I had craved for my entire life. It simply read, "Thank you for showing up." It was the phrase Frank and Darlene had never once uttered to me, despite all the years I spent making their holidays possible. While I was occupied with the perfect logistics of the dinner, managing the timeline, coordinating the jazz playlist, and adjusting the outdoor heaters for the balcony, Grandma Louise was executing her own, silent logistical operation, one I knew absolutely nothing about. While I was setting the democratic table 2,000 miles away, Grandma Louise was meeting with the Stone family's long-standing estate lawyer back in Ohio. Her lawyer, Mr. Davidson, was an old-school professional who had handled the family's assets for 40 years, long before Darlene entered the picture. Grandma Louise had requested a full review and a significant amendment to her last will and testament. The previous will had been structured to heavily favor Frank, the eldest son, which by extension would have given Darlene and Brielle substantial access and control over her traditional assets. She dictated the changes to a stunned Mr. Davidson. She was transferring the family's ancestral home in Maple Ridge, a substantial fixed deposit of her personal savings, and the controlling interest in the remaining, undeveloped portion of the original Stone Farm property, all to me, Grace. The condition was ironclad. The house could not be sold or used by Frank to compel Grace's return to Ohio. The transfer was unconditional, a silent acknowledgement of my right to that legacy, regardless of my wealth. More importantly, Grandma Louise insisted that Mr. Davidson prepare a supplementary handwritten letter to be delivered with the official documents. Her hands, aged but steady, meticulously wrote out the statement that served as her final judgment on the family dynamics. Grace is the only one who ever asked, "What about everyone else's share?" At the old table, she is the one who will handle the future. She sealed the letter in a thick private envelope, placing it inside the worn, dark cloth satchel she would carry with her to Port Halcyon. It was more than a gift. It was a legal and moral indictment of the system I had just escaped. I was aware of her immense kindness and her acceptance. I was utterly unaware of the sheer, devastating legal weight she was placing behind my rebellion. The afternoon of December 31st, everything was aligned. I did a final walkthrough of the Halcyon Ridge estate. The enormous, industrial-style light fixtures over the dining table were set to a warm, inviting glow. The sound system was queued up with quiet, smooth jazz. On the glass balcony, the powerful outdoor heaters were humming, ready to warm the chilly Pacific air. In a high, discreet corner of the kitchen, out of sight, tucked above the expansive cabinetry, I placed a small, simple camera. It wasn't for broadcasting or surveillance. It was to capture the night's genuine joy. The faces of the people finally reunited and relaxed. A perfect, unassailable piece of evidence that this night was real, intimate, and profoundly meaningful. I wanted a record of the night I finally hosted my family, the right one. I checked the status of the air transfers. Ava and Uncle Dean were due to land within the next hour. The logistics were flawless. I was focused on the party, on the coming together. I believed I was merely setting a spectacular new boundary. I had no way of knowing that Grandma Louise wasn't simply bringing a pecan pie and a supportive presence. She was flying across the country carrying an official, legally binding death sentence for Darlene's wooden spoon, and for the corrupt, decades-old power structure of the Stone family itself. The kitchen was set, the guests were inbound, and the truth was in transit, sealed in a thick envelope. The first guests arrived precisely at 6 o'clock that evening. Shattering the pristine silence of the glass house, it was Ava, her husband Tom, and their two noisy, wonderfully unruly children, a boy and a girl under 10 years old. Each new arrival had the same reaction. They would step inside, pause at the transition from the muted entryway into the expansive living space, and stand dead still. Their eyes would automatically track to the floor-to-ceiling glass wall, drawn by the mesmerizing, glittering expanse of Port Halcyon spread out below. Uncle Dean arrived next, clutching a massive, aluminum-wrapped container that, by its shape, contained the legendary pecan pie. He was followed by a scattering of long-unseen cousins, people who had drifted away from the main family vortex because they, too, had been deemed too complicated or not useful enough. The atmosphere immediately shifted from elegant solitude to loud, messy, authentic connection. The children, in particular, were mesmerized. They ran straight out onto the heated balcony, wrapping themselves in the soft, thick wool blankets I had meticulously laid out. They pointed excitedly at the flashing beacons of the distant container ships, the twinkling lights of the harbor docks, and the tiny, glowing ferries crossing the bay. I stood back, watching them, and a knot I didn't know I carried loosened in my chest. In this space, no child was being told to stay inside, to be quiet, or to guard the house. While the important people enjoyed the show, they were the show. They were invited to witness the beauty of the world from the highest vantage point. Ava found me near the perimeter of the kitchen island, pulling me into a quiet corner while the children shrieked with delight outside. "Grace," she whispered, her voice low and thick with genuine feeling. "I'm not trying to be dramatic, but you were always the shadow in their kitchen, the quiet one who made sure the ice was full and the dishes were done. To see you standing here, in the center of your kitchen, a place like this, it feels weird. Yes, but it feels so profoundly right." "It's just glass and stone, Ava." I tried to deflect, but my own voice felt oddly charged. "No, it's not," she insisted, shaking her head. "It's the opposite of that 1980s beige box Darlene made us all live in. It's transparency." Grandma Louise was the last to arrive. Stepping through the front door just after 7 o'clock, she wore a heavy, sensible wool coat and carried her dark, worn cloth satchel, the one containing the letter and the legal documents. Her breath misted in the cold air, but her eyes were clear and penetrating. She didn't rush to greet anyone. She simply stopped at the threshold of the magnificent white granite kitchen, looked slowly around the brightly lit space, and inhaled deeply the scent of herbs, roasting chicken, and the salty Pacific air. A small, knowing smile touched her lips. "Finally," she announced, her voice soft but carrying perfectly in the silent moment of anticipation. A kitchen not designed to shame people. The dinner was a revelation. It wasn't the high-tension, mandatory performance of the Maple Ridge gatherings. It was relaxed, conversational, and deeply nourishing. Food was passed hand to hand across the long table. They talked, not about Brielle's latest perceived triumph, but about Uncle Dean's new hobby, about Ava's children, and about my new consulting job. the easy lie I maintained. They asked genuine questions about the logistical challenges of the supply chain, which I answered with simplified, non-specific details about system architecture. Crucially, no one asked me the fatal question: why don't you move closer to home? No one referenced Brielle as the established metric of success. I was treated as a peer, as a successful individual who had made valid, logical life choices. The best part of the evening was the kitchen ritual. Marco, the young chef, had entered into the spirit of the evening entirely. Before setting the main course on the table, he invited everyone, one by one, to step up to the island and stir the rich, simmering cream sauce for the bisque, or to whisk the compound butter. From the quietest cousin to the loudest child, everyone approached the stir-your-way station. They laughed. They chose the biggest, silliest wooden spoon, or the tiniest whisk. They moved the pots with clumsy, enthusiastic abandon. I watched as the children, sticky-fingered and giggling, were celebrated for their effort, not corrected for their technique. With every smile, every choice of a utensil, every bit of positive reinforcement, I felt the sharp, decades-old scar left by Darlene's wooden spoon start to fade, dissolving into the warm, yellow light of the perfect, functional kitchen. It was more than a party. It was collective trauma therapy orchestrated around a butter sauce. It was during this peak of celebratory chaos that the fatal logistical error occurred. Ava's 8-year-old daughter, Clara, a bright, bubbly whirlwind of digital native confidence, grabbed her mother's phone. She had just finished proudly stirring the herbs into the roasting pan and was thrilled with the chaos and the beauty of the glass house. She snapped a picture. It was a perfect shot. The entire family gathered in the magnificent kitchen, smiling, blurred with movement and light, with me standing at the center of the granite island, the golden light of the chandeliers turning my kitchen into a magazine set. Clara instantly posted the picture to her private social media story, adding a caption written with pure, unadulterated childish awe. New Year's dinner on the hill feels like a movie. In her excitement, she forgot one critical digital habit: turning off the geotagging. Beneath the caption, the location marker blazed forth with the full, highly specific name of the neighborhood, Halcyon Ridge Overlook Estate. It was a prestigious, well-known cluster of multi-million-dollar properties in Port Halcyon, the kind of area that screams wealth, exclusivity, and permanence. The story was, of course, public to her wide network of distant, loosely connected family members. Within 30 minutes, a second cousin twice removed in Maple Ridge, a woman named Janice, who maintained a pathological vigilance over the main family's status, saw the post. Janice saw the picture. Grandma Louise, Uncle Dean, who was supposed to be in Michigan and estranged, and Grace, the shadow, standing in a kitchen that looked like the cover of Architectural Digest, perched above a glittering city. Janice, who was currently watching her own quiet New Year's Eve, immediately recognized the massive discrepancy between Darlene's narrative, the simple just the three of us story, and the stunning reality playing out 2,000 miles away. Janice quickly screenshotted the image and the devastating location tag. She forwarded both immediately to the main dormant Stone family group chat, the very same group chat where Darlene, Frank, and Brielle were busy sending carefully staged photos of their quiet night at home, emphasizing their closeness and lack of drama. On the hill, I remained blissfully unaware of the digital bomb that had just dropped. I raised my glass of sparkling cider with my reunited, chosen family. The laughter around the table bounced off the glass walls, a warm, resonant sound. For the first time in my life, I stood in a crowded kitchen, surrounded by noise and activity, and I didn't feel the need to shrink, to apologize, or to fade into a corner. I was the center of the system, and the logistics were perfect. All that remained was the final, devastating delivery of the consequence. The celebration was reaching its peak. Marco was carefully slicing the rustic, towering apple tart onto individual dessert plates, the warm scent of cinnamon and caramelized apples filling the vast, beautiful kitchen. Laughter was still echoing, the low, rich sound of reunited family catching up on years of separation. I was reaching for a bottle of excellent dessert wine when the high-pitched chime of the security intercom pierced the cozy ambient noise of the jazz music. It was an unexpected, ugly sound. I walked to the control panel near the kitchen entrance and glanced at the screen. The video feed, stark and clear, showed three figures standing at the imposing lower gate of the estate, bundled in heavy winter coats, their faces a chaotic mix of fury, confusion, and shock. It was Frank, Darlene, and Brielle. Behind them, high above the city, a premature burst of municipal fireworks flared, the brilliant green and gold light reflecting momentarily on the immaculate hood of their expensive rental SUV. The dramatic, unsolicited backdrop of the explosions only heightened the tension. Darlene, always the first to commandeer any interaction, leaned aggressively into the intercom camera. Her voice, thin and distorted by the digital feed, was sharp with cold command. "Grace, open the gate. We need to talk, right now." The kitchen, moments ago a haven of warmth, fell absolutely silent. The soft melody of the jazz seemed to stop mid-note. Ava gasped, her hand flying to her mouth, and she whispered, her eyes wide with shock. They were not invited. Uncle Dean, who had been laughing just a moment ago, crossed his arms over his chest, his face hardened, every line of past resentment snapping into place. The children, sensing the sudden, unnatural silence of the adults, stopped their playful chatter and stared, their small bodies absorbing the electric shift in the atmosphere. I had only a few seconds to make a choice. I could hit the ignore button, secure my boundaries, and preserve the fragile peace of the evening, or I could open the gate and accept the challenge, transforming my perfect safe house into the courthouse for the emotional trial Grandma Louise had so quietly prepared for. I looked across the room. Grandma Louise, who had been sipping a cup of herbal tea, met my gaze. She offered a minuscule, almost imperceptible nod, a movement that only I, after 40 years of observation, would recognize. The nod said, "It's time. You built the stage. Now, face them." I pressed the button that opened the lower security gate. The trio still had the long, winding drive up the ridge to contend with. I used the time. I quickly shepherded the children and my guests into the central living area, away from the kitchen entrance. 5 minutes, I instructed Marco. Keep the dessert in the oven until I give the signal. I walked back to the kitchen, closing the massive sliding glass door that separated the living space from the kitchen and the main hallway. The glass was thick, soundproofing the main room just enough to protect the children from the opening salvo. I met them at the inner hallway door, standing framed in the light of my own home. My posture was straight, my expression neutral, the perfect professional mask I had perfected while negotiating the $90 million sale. Darlene launched her attack before Frank even had time to fully step across the threshold. She shucked off her heavy designer coat, dropping it dramatically onto my pristine stone floor. "How long did you think you could keep this a secret?" she spat, her voice tight with suppressed rage and humiliation. "How long until you decided to stop lying to your father? The entire town of Maple Ridge knows about your ridiculous display. Do you have any idea how cheap and pathetic this makes us look? Like we abandoned you, while you're out here flaunting 8 figures of money?" I kept my voice calm, cool, and level, cutting through her manufactured outrage like a laser. "I wasn't flaunting, Darlene. I was hosting a private dinner for the people you excluded this year. The people who were explicitly told they were not complicated enough or not welcome enough to be at Brielle's house. You texted me and said New Year's Eve was just at Brielle's. I simply filled the vacancy." My response was factual, logistical, and stripped of emotion, which visibly infuriated her more than any emotional outburst ever could. Brielle, standing slightly behind her parents, was visibly overwhelmed. The anger on her face was mixed with genuine, wide-eyed astonishment as her eyes darted past me, drinking in the vast scale of the kitchen, the gleaming copper pots, and the panoramic view. "Grace," she stammered, holding up her phone which was undoubtedly displaying Clara's geotagged photo. Is this Is this really your house? What did you do to get a place like this? That's Halcyon Ridge. Are you with some wealthy firm? Is this your boss's house? Her questions weren't accusations as much as they were a desperate attempt to fit my reality back into the tiny, familiar box of her understanding. I didn't answer her. Brielle's lack of insight was its own punishment. Frank finally stepped forward, moving with the heavy, forced authority of a man trying to reassert his dominance over a situation that was clearly spiraling out of his control. "Grace, this is unacceptable," he gritted out, his eyes flickering with an unpleasant mix of confusion and wounded entitlement. "You have no right to gather family members behind our backs. What gives you the authority to pull my own mother into your childish rebellion? Who gave you permission to turn her against us?" The accusation, "Who gave you permission?" was the final, unforgivable word, the embodiment of every dismissal, every correction, and every silent abandonment of my childhood. I didn't raise my voice. I took a deliberate, slow step forward, forcing each of them to take a half step back. I made eye contact with Frank, allowing him to see the cold, absolute clarity in my gaze. "I don't need anyone's permission to invite my grandmother to my house. Frank," I stated, emphasizing the possessive pronoun with surgical precision. "This is not a rebellion. It is a boundary, and this is the new rule. From now on, if you want a conversation with me, or with any member of this family whom you have habitually excluded, it will not be in secret. It will not be in private. It will be out in the open, in front of the people you tried to silence. It will happen now, in my home, in front of the family you abandoned me to." I paused, then extended my hand toward the closed glass door, indicating the warm, silent room full of people and light behind it. "And you can start by apologizing to Uncle Dean and Grandma Louise for the last 15 years of your indifference, or you can leave now and watch the fireworks from the street below." The ball had officially dropped. The logistical plan was perfect. The system was now operating at maximum pressure. I held the gaze of my father, Frank, for a long moment, allowing him to absorb the absolute finality of my decision. Then, I turned and pushed the heavy glass door open, leading the trio into the center of the room. The instant we entered, the warm, low chatter around the long dining table ceased entirely. The only sound was the subtle melody of the jazz music, which suddenly felt less like background noise and more like the somber prelude to a drama. For the first time in what must have been 30 years, Darlene walked into a family gathering and realized there was no designated center seat reserved for her. She seemed to short-circuit, unable to find her footing in this democratized space. Her eyes scanned the room, the warmth, the expensive simplicity, the sight of all the people she had personally alienated, now sitting happily together, and her confusion quickly curdled back into reflexive aggression. She moved directly to the large granite island, her gaze landing on the array of utensils I had hung on the wall. Almost instinctively, Darlene grabbed one of the polished walnut spoons, turning it over in her hand, assessing it, as if she were inspecting it for flaws in my stirring technique. "Well, at least you learned something in that expensive school." She sniffed, her voice dripping with scorn. She pointed the spoon at me. "But did anyone teach you about respect? Did they teach you how to treat the people who paid for your clothes and raised you?" I walked calmly toward the island, my internal temperature dropping to 0 degrees, my focus absolute. I placed my hand deliberately on the other end of the wooden handle. For a brief, agonizing few seconds, we stood there, linked by the weapon she had chosen to seize. The entire room, Ava, Uncle Dean, the cousins, Marco the chef, even the children, held its breath. The silence was thick with the weight of decades of unspoken abuse. It was as if time had reversed, placing us back in the Maple Ridge kitchen. Only this time, my hand was steady, and my eyes were utterly devoid of fear. I was not a victim. I was the homeowner. It was in that pregnant moment that Grandma Louise rose from her seat at the table. She walked with quiet, resolute purpose toward the island, her dark satchel still resting near her chair. "Enough, Darlene," Grandma Louise said, her voice clear and carrying perfectly in the vast, silent space. the matriarchal command, rarely used, was absolute. That spoon does not belong to you anymore. Grandma Louise gently but firmly took the spoon from Darlene's numb fingers. She did not raise it. She did not swing it. Instead, she brought it down sharply, deliberately, onto the cool, hard granite surface of the island. The sound of the wood hitting the stone was loud, a single, sharp crack that echoed like the gavel of a judge delivering a final verdict. The tension broke, replaced by stunned silence. Darlene recoiled, as if she had been struck. Grandma Louise turned to Frank, her gaze filled not with anger, but with profound disappointment. "And you, Frank," she continued, her voice softer now, but infinitely more damning. "For 30 years, you sat quietly while your wife turned that kitchen into a weapon, using our family's heritage of food to shame your own daughter. You watched her become a servant who did all the work, but was never allowed to claim the success. You called her resilience, independence. I call it your failure to protect her." A wave of quiet murmurs swept through the room. Ava stood up, her face flushed with courage, and addressed Frank and Darlene directly. "I saw Grace scrubbing counters until midnight after Brielle's graduation party. The three of you were taking photos on the porch, and Grace was cleaning alone. When she asked for help, Darlene yelled at her for stirring the ice cream base wrong. You were all there." Uncle Dean, his usual affable demeanor replaced by cold fury, nodded. "I remember that. I offered to help Grace, and Frank told me to stay out of it. Grace was 18 years old. She had just finished high school, and you treated her like an indentured servant instead of a daughter." The room was no longer a dinner party. It was an impromptu court of judgment, presided over by the people who had suffered their silent neglect. Grandma Louise reached into her satchel and pulled out the thick, official envelope. She opened it and placed the newly amended will and the accompanying letter onto the granite island, right next to the fallen wooden spoon. "The old house," she announced, her voice resonating with authority. "The land, the savings, everything that represents the Stone family's roots in Maple Ridge, I have transferred it to Grace, not because she is the wealthiest," she glanced pointedly at Brielle and Frank, "but because she is the only person here tonight who has opened her door to everyone she knows needed a home. She is the only one who values the community over the hierarchy." I felt a surge of unexpected, overwhelming emotion, but I kept my composure. I reached out and placed my hand lightly, almost protectively, on the corner of the document. I did not lift it in triumph. This was not a trophy. It was a responsibility. I looked at Frank, Darlene, and Brielle one last time, making sure they understood the new system. "I will not use that house, that money, or this kitchen to banish anyone," I said, my voice low and steady, radiating absolute control. "I won't do what you did to me. But from this moment forward, there is one law in my life. No one will use a kitchen, or a spoon, or a relationship to make another person feel small. If you cannot live by that rule, if you cannot look at Uncle Dean, at Ava, or at me, and treat us as equals, then you do not belong in my space, and the door, that one right there, is always open for you to leave." The silence this time was truly absolute. Darlene's face was white, her years of perceived authority dissolving like salt in water. Frank looked old, broken by the realization that his passivity had cost him the only piece of family history he truly cared about. Brielle was just confused, unable to reconcile the magnificent reality of the house with the failure of her family's narrative. Grandma Louise smiled, a genuine, warm smile of victory. She picked up the wooden spoon from the granite island and, with a gentle, symbolic gesture, handed it to me. "You keep it, Grace," she instructed, "not to hit back, but to remember that you earned the right to put it down." As she spoke, the final, enormous burst of New Year's fireworks erupted over the city of Port Halcyon, filling the sky with a cascade of electric silver and brilliant blue. The light reflected off the glass walls, illuminating the faces of everyone in the room, the relieved, the defiant, and the utterly defeated. I stood in my own perfect kitchen, the wooden spoon warm in my hand, and looked out over my world. My voice was calm, the voice of a CEO, a logician, and a survivor. My whole life, I thought I only had two choices: stand silently in someone else's kitchen and take the correction, or stand alone in the cold. I concluded, looking directly at the camera I had placed high above the island. It turns out there was a third option all along: build your own kitchen and open the door only to the people who know how to put the spoon down. Thank you for listening to my story, and to all the listeners out there who have found their own way out of the kitchen. I want to hear from you. Comment below and tell me where you are listening from and what your favorite part of this journey was. Don't forget to like this video, subscribe to Lila Revenge Stories, and hit that hype button to help my story reach more people.